You were never supposed to hear this, not in this lifetime, not with the way they have worked to bury it beneath the dirt, the blood and the generations of silence. There is a road in the hills of West Virginia where the trees grow too close together, their branches crossing like skeletal fingers. And if you take it far enough past the rusting mailboxes and the collapsed barns, you will find the place. The air changes there. It becomes thicker, like it has been holding its breath for decades. The Whittakers did not choose this life. It was built around them brick by brick before they were even born, the result of bloodlines looping back into themselves, of towns left to rot after the coal barons took their riches and vanished for years. Their name was spoken only in whispers, and always with the weight of something wrong hanging behind it, before the world ever knew their faces. Before the cameras came, they lived in a kind of exile that was not measured by miles, but by perception. Outsiders did not just avoid them, they hunted them, they ridiculed them, they turned them into shadows in their own land. In the quiet of their porch, the family built a fortress of love, but love alone does not keep the wolves out. The old ones told stories about the time before when John Whittaker, a coal miner with hands like stone, ruled the home with a voice sharp enough to cut through walls, when Gracie, their mother, fought off illness after illness until her heart gave out far too young. When the children learned that survival did not mean dreaming bigger, it meant becoming invisible, and yet the deeper you look, the more you see that the Whittakers are not an accident. They are a mirror held up to a system that designed places like this. Places where poverty is not a side effect, but the product, where people are locked in not by walls, but by the slow poison of isolation. This is not just their story. This is a fracture in America itself, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Michael Whittaker was not like the others in his family, at least not in the way the outsiders imagined he carried himself, with a kind of silent authority that came from years of watching and waiting and knowing when to step in. He was the guardian, not because anyone had crowned him so, but because in families like this, someone always has to become the wall between the world and the bloodline. From a young age, Michael understood that danger did not always wear a face. Sometimes it came in the form of men in suits with clipboards asking questions they had no right to ask. Sometimes it came in the sound of tires crunching gravel at night, headlights sweeping across the sagging house and disappearing before anyone stepped outside. Sometimes it was the camera lens of a stranger pretending to be curious when really they were hunting for something to mock. He was the first to meet them at the road, his tall frame blocking the narrow path the way an oak tree blocks a storm. He did not yell, he did not threaten. He simply stood there, and the silence did the work. He became a gate, and no one passed without his say-so. But inside the home, Michael was different. His voice softened, his hands busy with small repairs, patching the roof that sagged after every storm, fixing the door hinge that had been loose for years, making sure the wood stove stayed burning through the coldest nights in the holler. The others looked to him without even realizing it. In his presence there was a kind of steadiness, a certainty that if the roof held and the fire burned, they could survive another day. Yet even Michael could feel it. The weight that came from guarding something that the rest of the world did not understand, something that would never be accepted or forgiven, no matter how fiercely he protected it. The holler had its own way of keeping secrets, and Michael knew every twist of the dirt road, every shadow that stretched long across the valley at dusk. Every sound the wind made as it moved through the trees, like an old memory. It was a place where time moved differently, where years passed, but the faces inside the house barely changed. Visitors rarely came, and when they did, they were strangers from far away, drawn by whispers and stories they had heard from someone who had heard it from someone else. Michael always knew when they were coming. The air would change, the dogs would bark differently. The quiet would grow heavy. He would meet them before they could see too much, standing with his boots planted in the mud, hands in his pockets, watching with eyes that said you've seen enough before you even started. To Michael, this was not just about privacy, it was about survival, because the moment the wrong person saw too much, the family became a spectacle, a sideshow for the curious and the cruel. Inside the walls, things went on as they always had, the wood floor creaking under bare feet, the smell of cooking that clung to the air, the sound of soft voices in a language of their own part, words, part hums, part unspoken understanding that only they could share. Michael guarded that language as much as he guarded the people, because he knew once it was taken, it would never come back, and without it, the heart of the family would be gone. In his mind, the outside world was a wave always trying to crash in, and his job was to be the rock that refused to move, no matter how many tides came and went. The winters in the holler were a test for anyone who dared to stay. The cold settled deep into the bones, and the frost painted the windows in patterns that looked like broken glass. Michael moved through those months, like a man carrying a weight that could never be set down, making sure the fire never went out, and that every mouth had something to eat, no matter how thin the pantry became. When snow came, it trapped them in, like a slow-moving prison wall, the road disappearing beneath a blanket so thick that no one could tell where the earth ended and the sky began. But Michael saw this as safety, because the snow kept the world away and gave him time to think and plan without interruption. In the evenings, he would sit near the fire, listening to the creak of the house as it shifted in the cold, and to the quiet breathing of the ones he watched over. There was a strange comfort in those sounds, a reminder that they were still together, still alive, still holding on. Sometimes his mind would drift to the days before he took on the role of guardian, back when he was just another face in the crowd. But those thoughts never lasted long. The present demanded too much of him to leave space for the past. In the deep of night, when the fire was only embers and the wind pressed against the walls, he would get up, walk to the door, and look out over the silent, snow-covered trees, his breath curling in the air like smoke. He would stand there for long moments, listening to the stillness, knowing that tomorrow would bring the same duties and the same fight to keep his family safe. It was in those moments that Michael felt both the weight and the pride of what he carried, for in a world quick to forget the ones who did not fit, he had chosen to remember and protect them no matter the cost. Spring in the holler came slow and stubborn, like a wounded animal trying to stand. The snow melted in hesitant trickles, revealing mud and stone beneath, and the trees took their time to show green again. Michael used this season to repair what winter had broken, patching the roof, mending the fences, and clearing the path that wound its way to the old road. The thaw brought visitors, sometimes distant relatives, curious strangers, or the occasional drifter, all of them drawn by whispers of the family tucked away in the hills. Michael greeted them with the same measured calm, never giving more than he needed to, and always keeping watch over their eyes to see what they were really here for. He knew that not everyone came with kindness in their heart. Some came for stories to tell, some came to judge, and some came simply to see if the rumors were true. Michael stood between them and his family like a wall, weathered and unyielding, letting only what was safe pass through. The air in spring carried the scent of wet earth and growing things, a reminder that life pressed on no matter the scars it bore. He found himself walking the woods more often, listening to the birds and the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth. These were his moments of peace, stolen between the hours of labor and watchfulness. In the evenings, the family would gather outside, sitting on worn chairs or the old steps, watching the last light fade behind the ridge. Michael would say little, but his presence spoke enough. They knew he was there. They knew he would not let harm come their way. Spring was a time for rebuilding, for breathing easier, if only for a while. But Michael never let the guard inside him lower, because he understood that peace in the holler was fragile, and the world beyond was always closer than it seemed. Summer in the holler was thick with heat and sound, the air heavy with the hum of cicadas and the low call of bullfrogs from the creek. Michael rose before the sun most days, using the cool hours to work the garden and tend the animals. Before the heat grew oppressive, the corn reached high and the beans climbed their poles, a quiet promise of food for the colder months ahead. Visitors became more frequent in summer, their cars crunching along the dirt road in a cloud of dust. Some came with cameras, others with questions. But Michael kept them at the edge of the property, speaking in short, measured sentences, his hands resting on the fence like a silent warning to turn back when their curiosity stepped too far. The children played barefoot in the yard, their laughter carrying through the trees, and Michael kept his eyes on them. Even from a distance, he had learned that danger did not always come in the shape of a stranger. Sometimes it came from a glance, a whispered word, a harmless request that was not so harmless at all. Summer storms rolled over the mountains without warning, drenching the ground and shaking the old house with thunder. Michael welcomed the rain, though it made his work harder for it, cooled the air, and brought life back into the soil at night. He would sit by the window watching lightning split the sky, his mind turning over the same thoughts of how to keep his family safe when the next challenge came. The days stretched long, but Michael bore them with quiet strength, his skin darkened by the sun, and his muscles carrying the weight of every repair, every task, every silent stand between the family and the outside world. Summer was not a season for rest, but for endurance, and Michael knew how to endure better than most. When the first chill of autumn touched the mountains, Michael felt the shift deep in his bones, the green leaves fading to gold and red, the air carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The harvest began slowly at first. Baskets of beans, then ears of corn piled high in the kitchen, each one a reminder that their survival was measured in what they could store for the long winter ahead. Michael moved through the days with the same steady pace, repairing the roof, patching the barn, stacking firewood, higher than his own head. He knew the snow would come hard and sudden, as it always did, and he would not be caught unprepared. The sound of the axe striking wood echoed across the holler, like a warning to anyone who thought this family might be easy prey. The younger ones watched him work their eyes. Learning what their hands would one day have to do, they followed his path from field to shed to the old fence where he paused every evening, scanning the tree line for movement. He had no illusions about the world beyond these hills. It was not made for them, and it would never understand them on the final day before frost. Michael stood on the porch in the fading light, his breath clouding in the air. The fields lay empty now, the earth bare and resting like the family within. He knew the cold months would test them, but he also knew that they would survive because that was what Whittakers did. They endured, they guarded, they kept the bloodline alive, no matter the cost. The night settled in heavy and quiet, and Michael stepped inside, closing the door against the darkness outside, his shadow stretching across the worn wooden floor, the firelight catching the lines of his face, each one carved by years of work and watchfulness. He did not smile, but his eyes held the same promise they always had, that as long as he stood, the family would not fall.